exactly 2:20 a.m., September 14, 2025. The forests of Leningrad Oblast stood silent beneath a dense northern mist, broken only by the hum of an approaching freight convoy. 15 tank cars, each carrying diesel fuel, rolled toward the Gachina rail hub, the last operational artery feeding Russia's southern defenses around St. Petersburg. But what appeared to be a routine supply mission was about to become one of the most costly logistical disasters of the war. How can one night operation costing less than $10,000 cripple an entire front line worth millions? This question has haunted analysts across NATO since the incident, which officials in Kiev have quietly described as a calculated precision strike. According to early field data confirmed by open-source intelligence, Ukrainian operatives from the Shchit-91 combat group had penetrated deep behind enemy lines. Dressed as maintenance workers, they planted directional explosives beneath a section of track near Stroganovo. From a distant command post, a fiber-optic drone relay provided live thermal imagery, a cutting-edge method that left no electromagnetic trace. On their screens glowed the bright signature of the train, its diesel load radiating heat in sharp detail. Analysts later confirmed that over 2.2 million pounds of fuel were on board, enough to sustain several armored brigades for a week. The convoy was moving through the Luga-Gachina corridor, the only line still linking St. Petersburg's defensive ring to its southern operational zones. Severing this artery meant stranding entire mechanized divisions without fuel, a blow far beyond the tactical scale. Western military observers told Reuters that this attack demonstrated an evolution of Ukrainian sabotage tactics, moving from symbolic strikes to operations targeting the structural metabolism of Russia's war machine. BBC defense analyst Jonathan Beale noted that the assault marks the point where small unit warfare meets industrial-level disruption. It wasn't just a hit and run, it was a coordinated decapitation of logistics. Intelligence sources cited by Defense News revealed that this operation had been planned for weeks. Using intercepted GSM packets from logistics relay stations and satellite imagery from commercial providers, Ukraine had reconstructed the train's entire route from its departure time to its refueling stops. NATO's electronic intelligence network quietly assisted in verification, though Western officials have refrained from public acknowledgement. Still, the precision implied a level of data fusion nearly impossible without shared intelligence between partners. At the White House, President Donald Trump was briefed early that morning. A senior official told the New York Times that while the administration did not comment publicly, internal briefings praised the surgical efficiency of the strike. For NATO, the implications were strategic, if such low-cost sabotage could immobilize a critical corridor. Russia's vast logistics web, stretching thousands of miles, might prove far more brittle than its wartime propaganda suggested. From a command bunker 75 miles away, Ukrainian operators monitored every pixel of thermal data. The convoy's speed, 27 miles per hour. Ambient temperature, 46 Celsius. No radar coverage, no jamming. The signal was clean, the target isolated. The plan: derail the lead cars, halt the train in a dead zone, and unleash a second-phase aerial strike. In the silent forest near Stroganovo, the charges were armed. A trigger wire ran beneath the sleepers, connecting to a microsensor that would detect the precise axle pressure of the third car, the moment of maximum vulnerability. The operative slipped away unnoticed, vanishing into the tree line as the hum of the locomotive grew louder in the distance. By then, the convoy's fate was sealed. Its timetable, once secret, had become a countdown. And as the minutes ticked toward impact across NATO's intelligence channels, a quiet realization emerged. Ukraine had just rewritten the rules of industrial warfare, where data, not divisions, dictated victory. But the most dramatic moment was still to come, when the trap would spring, and the railway beneath the train would quite literally vanish. The first tremor hit at 2:51 a.m. A sharp metallic crack echoing through the mist as the lead cars of the Russian fuel convoy rolled over the mined section of track near Stroganovo. A buried pressure sensor tripped. Within milliseconds, a string of precisely timed charges detonated, shearing the rail fasteners and twisting the iron lines apart like wire. The entire locomotive lurched violently. Car after car buckled under the weight of 2 million pounds of diesel sliding off the track into the ballast. Inside the cab, alarms screamed. The chief engineer pulled the emergency brake, but it was already too late. What followed wasn't just a derailment, it was the opening act of a modern asymmetric offensive. On a thermal feed, transmitted through a fiber-optic UAV link, the Ukrainian command team watched in real time. No radio signals, no GPS bursts, only silent data pulses traveling through a glass core thinner than a human hair. Their screen flared white as the train shuddered to a halt in the clearing precisely within the air defense blind zone they had mapped days earlier. From the forest, 12 miles away, an encrypted command flashed to a hidden truck. 4 FPV drones, each rigged with PG-7VL anti-armor warheads, lifted into the night sky. They weren't standard hobby models. These were hardened units with reinforced frames, 56xx digital zoom, and data links strong enough to punch through Russian jamming fields. Cruise speed 110 miles per hour. Range 10 miles. Flight time 12 minutes, just enough to finish the job. Western analysts later compared the maneuver to the US Wolfpack doctrine from World War II, decentralized strikes coordinated by data and timing rather than command hierarchy. This is 21st century warfare distilled to its essence, wrote Defense News columnist Mark Thompson. One man with a laptop can now inflict the same logistical paralysis that once required entire bomber squadrons. At 2:52 a.m., the drones split formation. UAV-1 targeted car number 3. UAV-2 banked left toward car 9. UAV-3 swung south to strike the rear tankers. UAV-4 climbed high above holding position to dive on the locomotive itself. Meanwhile, Russian railway guards stationed near Luga reported only a faint vibration too far to raise an alarm. The nearest rapid reaction unit was 20 miles away. Inside the cockpit, the driver's final transmission was a routine report, speed 27, pressure stable. Seconds later, their signal cut to static. In NATO's Brussels command center, the feed from commercial satellites began updating every few minutes. U.S. Air Force analysts monitoring the region noted the sudden thermal bloom, a pattern consistent with detonation, not accident. An American defense official told BBC World Service that the precision timing and isolation of the strike strongly suggest deep reconnaissance integration, likely a joint SIGINT operation with Western data verification. Ukraine's Ministry of Defense released no official comment, but sources close to Kyiv Independent later confirmed that this operation, codenamed Northern Vein, had been approved weeks prior. It was designed to expose the weakness of Russia's domestic logistics, an arterial strike strategy now under study by NATO defense colleges. The first explosion turned night into day. A jet of flame leapt 80 feet high, marking the instant UAV-1's warhead punched through car number 3. The fireball engulfed the front section, cascading flames down the couplings. Within seconds, UAV-2 and UAV-3 were on target. A second and third detonation followed, ripping open the middle and rear cars. The convoy disintegrated into 3 burning clusters, each a separate inferno. From miles away, residents of Mashinskaya reported the sky glowing orange like sunrise through smoke. Back in the Ukrainian control post, the team leader uttered a single command: finish it. UAV-4 dove toward the locomotive at 110 miles per hour. The final detonation tore through the engine housing's small, precise terminal. The Russian train was dead. But the true scale of destruction and its strategic shockwave across Europe was only beginning to unfold. By 2:55 a.m., the night sky above Stroganovo was transformed into a wall of fire. The inferno consumed the derailed fuel train, scattering flaming debris across a half-mile radius. The air shimmered from the heat. The diesel vapors roared like jet engines as secondary explosions rippled down the line. In the command post, the thermal display turned into an overexposed blur, too bright for sensors to process. Local residents later told Novaya Gazeta Europe that the explosions sounded like thunder rolling endlessly through the woods. Even 20 miles away, the shockwaves rattled windows. Each tanker erupted in sequence, a fiery chain reaction that carved a wound through the Luga-Gachina corridor. At first, Russian emergency channels went silent. Then garbled messages began flooding regional command lines. Possible derailment fire visible from the highway, multiple tankers alight. But for nearly 40 minutes, there was no official confirmation, no dispatch. The sheer scale of the blaze made approach impossible. Thermal readings from independent analysts showed core temperatures exceeding 2,200 degrees hot enough to melt aluminum fittings and twist the steel frames of the cars. Reuters later confirmed through satellite data that 9 tankers were completely destroyed, their hulls ruptured and thrown dozens of meters from the tracks. The locomotive itself had split in two. For the Ukrainian strike team, the operation had cost less than $10,000 in total: 4 FPV drones, a fiber-optic relay drone, and a handful of directional charges. In contrast, Russia's material loss exceeded $3.5 million, not counting the operational chaos that followed. Defense experts across Europe drew stark conclusions. Military Watch magazine called it the most cost-effective strike of the entire conflict, while DW's military analyst Thomas Wiegold described it as a devastating proof that low-cost drone warfare has reached full maturity. He noted that NATO defense planners were now studying the attack's telemetry and sequencing a perfect model of hybrid precision warfare that could redefine doctrine. At dawn, the smoke plume rose over 650 feet into the air, drifting north toward Gachina. Commercial satellite passes from Maxar Technologies captured it in crystal clarity, a vertical scar visible from space. Russian telegram channels posted shaky footage showing fields burning and twisted tankers glowing red in the dark. Within hours, the clips had spread across the internet, fueling speculation of a major Ukrainian incursion. By 6 a.m., Moscow's transport ministry issued a curt statement. A technical malfunction caused a freight derailment in Leningrad Oblast. No casualties. All cars were empty. Yet imagery told another story, an inferno of proportions too vast to disguise. Analysts at Al Jazeera English cross-referenced open-source video with topographic maps, confirming that the blaze's intensity and smoke density could only result from diesel detonation, not empty cars. Meanwhile, the Kremlin moved to suppress coverage. Search results and social media posts containing the words Stroganovo Fuel Train or Luga Corridor were quietly filtered or deleted within hours. But Western intelligence had already logged the coordinates, satellite captures, and heat signatures. The evidence was immutable. In Washington, the Pentagon released no public statement, but officials confirmed to the New York Times that the incident was being analyzed as part of a broader pattern, a campaign aimed at disrupting Russia's strategic depth through precision economic warfare. Economists from the Rand Corporation later estimated that for every dollar Ukraine spent on sabotage, Russia was losing $350–400 in direct and indirect costs, a staggering asymmetry. This isn't just military damage, Rand analyst Richard Connolly told BBC Newsnight. It's systemic hemorrhage, the bleeding out of a logistical empire built on outdated assumptions. By midday, the fires still raged. Fuel slicks burned across meadows, forming ribbons of flame half a kilometer long. The air smelled of chemicals and charred metal. Nothing remained untouched. The Luga-Gachina artery, once a vital supply route, now lay in ruin. And yet, far from the smoke in NATO's intelligence centers, eyes were already turning to what came next, how Russia would respond, and what it might reveal about the limits of its endurance. By sunrise on September 14th, the inferno had smoldered into a wasteland of blackened steel and scorched soil. A dense column of smoke still hung over the wreckage, visible from orbiting satellites and civilian aircraft departing from St. Petersburg's Pulkovo airport. On the ground, what had once been a 15-car fuel train now resembled a twisted graveyard of metal bones. The fire had burned through the night, and through the narrative Moscow was desperate to control. Within hours, Russia's state media repeated the same official line track failure. No casualties, cars empty. But satellite imagery released by Planet Labs and verified by Reuters proved otherwise. The data showed at least 9 tankers burned out, their charred remnants scattered across nearly 1,000 feet of destroyed track. A plume of black smoke trailed nearly 2.5 miles toward Gachina. The Russian government's denial was instantly contradicted by global media outlets armed with geolocation tools, radar signatures, and independent video feeds. Western analysts described the Kremlin's silence as a tactical admission. According to BBC's defense correspondent Frank Gardner, when Moscow doesn't acknowledge an attack of this magnitude, it usually means the impact reached beyond repair, not just physical, but psychological. Inside Russia, the consequences rippled quietly but powerfully. The Luga-Gachina corridor, the last functioning rail artery in southern Leningrad Oblast, was cut off for 3 days. Supply convoys feeding armored brigades near Velesovo were stranded, forcing emergency reroutes through the Luga-Kingisepp line, a slower, narrower route vulnerable to further ambush. Satellite traffic data later revealed a 60% reduction in freight movement in the sector within 48 hours. That disruption translated into millions in lost operational value. Every train stopped means an entire brigade waiting idle, noted Al Jazeera military analyst Sami Zaidan. Fuel is the blood of war. Once it stops flowing, the army stiffens. Meanwhile, NATO's intelligence agencies dissected the operation with forensic precision. A report circulated among defense planners at SHAPE headquarters in Belgium referred to the attack as a masterclass in hybrid logistics denial. The Ukrainian tactic derail, isolate, destroy had fused conventional sabotage with digital reconnaissance, relying on real-time data streamed through a non-radiating fiber-optic UAV link, an innovation that stunned Western electronic warfare experts. An internal Pentagon briefing obtained by the New York Times assessed that the Stroganovo attack represented a scalable model for asymmetric rail interdiction. The memo added that similar operations could be executed across Russia's vast energy transport network at minimal cost, a nightmare scenario for Moscow's logistical planners. President Donald Trump, according to Defense News, was briefed twice on the event, while publicly silent sources inside the National Security Council confirmed that Trump had instructed Pentagon analysts to quantify Russia's loss-to-cost ratio, a figure that reportedly exceeded 401. The attack, officials noted, demonstrated not only Ukrainian ingenuity, but also NATO's indirect role in information synchronization and tactical planning. Across Europe, discussions grew louder about how such low-cost warfare could reshape future conflicts. DW analysts in Berlin pointed out that the Stroganovo incident might accelerate a new wave of Western investment in drone and fiber-optic reconnaissance technology, the same kind Ukraine had field-tested under wartime conditions. By late evening, cleanup teams still struggled to contain residual fires. Russian emergency services built earthen barriers around the site to prevent diesel seepage into nearby waterways, but the ground burned in places where spilled fuel had soaked deep beneath the ballast. Local residents reported black rain, oily droplets falling with the drizzle, the chemical remnants of the destroyed convoy. The official investigation never mentioned drones. Yet the wreckage itself told the story: puncture holes from shaped charges, symmetrical craters from FPV dives, and melted couplers fused by directed heat. Evidence of precision, not accident. And as night fell again over the smoldering rails, one question echoed through intelligence briefings from Brussels to Washington. If Ukraine can strike this deep with drones and data, what's next on Russia's map of vulnerability? The answer would soon come, not in words, but in fire. How does a single night of sabotage force an army to relearn how to move? Within 48 hours of the Stroganovo strike, patterns began to emerge that worried military planners. From Tallinn to Washington, freight density along the Luga-Gachina axis fell by roughly 2/3. Convoys doubled, escort numbers and tanker schedules fractured into smaller, more vulnerable shipments. Which begged the question to viewers: if fuel routes can be choked overnight, how many other vital lines are only one clever strike away? The immediate tactical shock was visible on logistics dashboards. Commercial rail traffic analysts registered a 60% drop in throughput for the sector in the 2 days after the attack, a disruption that NATO logistics officers said translated into delayed resupplies and paused mechanized movements along the Velesovo front. Independent reporting and satellite traffic corroborated those interruptions. Rail traffic was not merely delayed, it was restructured under duress. Economically, the damage multiplied. The direct material loss, tankers, locomotive and rail repairs, was estimated in the low millions, but secondary costs quickly ballooned. Brigades idled without fuel create cascading demands. Airlift priorities shift, maintenance cycles extend, and the cost of protected escort missions soars. RAND-style analysts and Western defense economists have increasingly used a loss-to-cost metric for such attacks. Initial field estimates around Stroganovo suggested a ratio in the hundreds to one, meaning every dollar spent by the attackers imposed hundreds in costs on the defender. That asymmetry retrains strategy. If a $10,000 operation can force reallocation of millions in resources, deterrence calculus changes. Politically, the ripple extended beyond the battlefield. NATO capitals privately debated urgent force posture changes, more mobile fuel caches, hardened rail choke points, and expanded counter-drone investments. Military planners told reporters that Ukraine's methods, rapid data fusion, non-radiating reconnaissance links, and low-cost strike platforms, could be replicated against commercially critical infrastructure across Europe if unchecked. That analysis echoed recent high-level assessments, warning that drone warfare had reached a scale capable of strategic paralysis. Western experts voiced stark warnings. One NATO logistics specialist briefed in Brussels called the attack logistics algebra on steroids: small inputs, massive outputs. A senior analyst at the Institute for the Study of War argued that targeted interdictions of supply nodes were now a core Ukrainian strategy designed to create permanent friction in Russian operational tempo. These assessments were not idle fear-mongering open-source probes into recent strikes, including refinery and rail hits elsewhere in Russia, underlined a coordinated campaign to attack energy flow as both military and economic pressure. Defensively, Moscow responded predictably: add more escorts, disperse loads, and publicly downplay the incident to maintain morale. But such fixes are expensive, slow, and leak effectiveness. Longer routes mean more exposure. More escorts mean fewer units at the front. In practice, the Kremlin found itself trading offensive depth for protected logistics, a strategic concession that NATO planners noticed with unusual satisfaction. The question now was whether Ukraine could scale this model. If so, Russia's vast interior would become a series of fragile arteries rather than an immutable supply trunk. For the West, the Stroganovo scenario became a working case study: invest in drone countermeasures, harden choke points, and accelerate Allied production of interceptor systems. The balance of power was still measured in tanks and missiles, but supply disruption had emerged as a force multiplier that could shape campaigns long before frontline clashes did. As analysts tallied costs and options, a new worry took shape in secret briefs. If Ukraine can repeat this at scale, which civilian infrastructures will be next, and how will NATO protect them without escalating the war? Could one night of arson and electronics force a superpower to relearn how to defend its backbone and change the calculus of war? Across NATO command rooms, intelligence desks, and parliamentary committees that question has become urgent. The Stroganovo strike did not just burn tankers. It illuminated a strategic truth: logistics, once boring routine and assumed secure, are now frontline targets. Western officials, noting the strike's timing and precision, concluded it was part of a broader pattern of interdiction that has already begun to reshape alliance planning. Reuters reported that U.S. officials are now providing Ukraine with intelligence on long-range energy and logistics targets, a development that has intensified debate inside capitals about how openly to support such strikes. NATO planners describe the incident as a template data-driven reconnaissance, surgical sabotage, and low-cost strike assets that impose outsized operational and economic costs on the defender. Analysts in Brussels flagged the loss-to-cost arithmetic as decisive: a single $10,000 sortie that forces millions in rerouting, repair, and protective measures is destabilizing in both budgetary and strategic terms. Within days, Allied logistics officers recommended immediate reforms, hardened choke points, mobile fuel caches, and far greater investments in counter-FPV capabilities. Those recommendations are now being weighed against political risks, strikingly even as Western capitals publicly avoid endorsing attacks deep inside Russia. The political dimension is fraught. President Donald Trump, briefed through national security channels, ordered staff to quantify the strategic ripple effects, and the loss-to-cost metric sources set a calculation likely to influence future U.S. posture and materiel decisions. At the same time, European governments are moving on defensive measures. Germany's cabinet has advanced new powers allowing police to neutralize rogue drones as part of a continent-wide push to blunt the emerging drone threat. That, law officials say, is a direct policy response to a rising wave of incidents across civil and military domains. Experts are now debating scale and scope. Some Western defense scholars warn that if Kyiv scales industrial interdiction, repeated geographically dispersed strikes against energy hubs, refineries, and rail choke points, Russia will be forced into either a costly domestic militarization of its logistics or a strategic contraction of its operational reach. The European Commission has framed the broader challenge as a gray zone campaign, urging member states to build resilient anti-drone architectures and to harden critical infrastructure against sabotage and covert strikes. But scaling carries risk. Every successful interdiction invites escalation, and every overt Western contribution to target lists raises legal and diplomatic questions. NATO's calculus now balances deterrence with de-escalation, how to help an embattled partner break an adversary's supply chain without turning supply line defense into a continental war over sovereignty and escalation ladders. Meanwhile, Russian internal responses, dispersal of rail loads, more escorts, and public denials have already inflated Moscow's logistical costs and stretched its force posture. Reports of multiple derailments across the Leningrad region and elsewhere have added urgency to Allied contingency plans. As night fell again over the scorched railbed near Gachina, analysts across NATO agreed on one hard fact: the era of cheap asymmetric logistics warfare has arrived. The alliance must now decide whether to treat this as a tactical problem to be solved with more interceptors and hardened tracks, or as a strategic inflection point that demands new doctrines, shared intelligence frameworks, and coordinated defensive production at scale. Which path will NATO choose, containment of the tactic or a doctrinal shift to meet a new kind of